Welcome to Beyond Bitcoin, a podcast about all things digital assets, the global communities they are creating, the generations that are using and investing in them, and the challenges faced by the nations that are seeking to regulate them. The content of this program is not to be taken as investment advice. The opinions expressed in the program by the host and the guests are their personal opinions only. Remember, feel free to subscribe and share with like-minded friends. My name is Derek Graham. I'm the CEO of Portal Asset Management, and my co-host is Nitin Gower, Managing Director of State Street Digital Assets. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome along to an episode of Beyond Bitcoin. And we have been traveling again, haven't we, Nitin?
We have, and it's interesting that we both are back to our home bases. So let's open up the can of worms, if I can call that, Derek, and discuss our travels.
Well, the great thing about our travels this time is that although we've both been attending conferences, they're very different locations, very different cultures, and very different circumstances that are driving them. And so we have an opportunity today to talk about the differences of the conference that you attended in the USA, which was permissionless in Austin, Texas, and what happened with my attendance at Singapore for the Token 2049. And it sounds to me from our little discussion beforehand, it's somewhat different. So let's go through that. Token 2049 in this wonderful city of Singapore. It's such an extraordinary place. Had 10,000 attendees, 200 speakers, 300 exhibitors, and get this, Nitin, 400 side events over the week.
Oh my God, it's a small city, 34 kilometers, and you have 400. How do you keep track of 400 events? I mean, how do you know which one to go to?
So you're the king of side events, but I'll tell you how me as an amateur does that. I had a spreadsheet with 145 side events on it, and I went through that spreadsheet and decided what was interesting and made application and went along to the few side events that I did attend, all of which were fascinating. So we'll go through a little bit of that because, as you know, a lot happens in the side events through all of this. So, you know, it started with an opening panel discussion, which I was at the main Token 2049 on the Wednesday and Thursday it ran last week. And we listened to, among others, the CEO, Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple, you know, talk about what was unquestionably still the cloud of the event, which was the SEC regulations. Now, I would argue it was a cloud, not the dark thunderstorm that simply covered everything with rain. It didn't. It was there. People talked about it. It was an annoyance, but Asia's moving forward. And that's the interesting take out of this. Asia's looking at this and thinking this is an opportunity to move forward as America is fumbling the ball. And so let's talk a bit about that. So the panel was really put together.
But before you go forward, Derek, help us understand. You had 10,000 people and I was truly envious. And I would say this is one of the few moments I'm actually envious because I'm usually traveling all over the place. 10,000 people, 400 side events. Action-packed week, including the F1, which as a car lover, please describe that. But could you describe the structure of the conference? Like, you know, how do you decide in such a big event as to what is the few things you pick? Because you can't be omnipresent. You have to pick your poison, your track. And how do you navigate that? I'm sure you had Expo too, which is a whole barrage of all these startup companies who are trying to make a name for themselves. How do you navigate that in like 2.5 days without actually losing your mind? Tell us that before we go into the summary of the event.
Well, you have to look at what are the events beforehand. Make sure you sort of map out a plan for what you're going to do for each one of the events. Then you look at the timing. Then, of course, you've got to book appointments. I had a number of people that I met during that period of time because I'm fascinated with the concept of tokenizing real world assets and ultimately tokenizing our funds in the future. And so I wanted to learn more about that. So I met those people on the side. And then it's the side events are the topics of interest to me, and are they generalist topics that are going to be broad and something that we can engage with. There are a lot of technology side events, hackathons, this sort of thing, you know, the youth of the future. There's no question that this is technology of, you know, the next generation coming that are going to use it. They already call them Generation C, the crypto generation. And so putting that together, you basically map out a plan and then slot it in, and then you weep over what you don't get to see, because the fact of the matter is you cannot be everywhere at every event, and you have to miss out on some on the way through. And hopefully along the way you might meet people that have been to those events. But we talk about that youth for just a moment. I sat next to a young guy, Teo Mitigag. We might even invite him onto the show. He's 14 years old, sitting in the front row of the conference with me, right? Absolutely animated by the space, engaged in everything, looking for an internship, which I probably think he's probably already got, because so many people are interested in speaking with him. He has been active in trading in the space, learning about the space, owning NFTs, et cetera, for 2 years. Now, that's since he was 12 years old. He's been active in it. So when you meet young people like that, you realize that the future are those generations that are coming through now that are actively engaged in the space. Those guys that don't have 20 years of finance history behind them, that are just looking at better ways to do things. So it was fascinating to sit next to this young man, and we may well get him on the show just to show you what Generation C is all about. However, once you've gone through and you've mapped out your gameplay, you then do your best to attend the events and gain the information. So it's always, I find, important to attend the opening key speeches along the way, and from those get a direction of where this industry is going. And the opening key speech was truly, it was wrapped around, of course, was wrapped around regulation and mostly around the US, and also around real world assets and what opportunities exist there. And I felt that was fascinating. But one takeaway was that the CEO of Ripple, which is Brad Garlinghouse, as I was saying earlier on, says that, look, the SEC can be beaten. We've proven it. And so has Grayscale. And that's given vigor and belief to many others that have gone in and now will be fighting the SEC on essentially regulations that are either outdated or not comprehensive, and in some cases getting made up. And so the panel went and discussed sort of the regulations that were really just lacking in the USA versus what was happening in Asia. And of course, we've seen what's happening in Hong Kong, which was particularly fascinating. And they talked about what was happening in Korea, because there was just beforehand, there was a Korea crypto gaming conference. And just before Token 49, there was also a conference in Bali on crypto. So you see what's happening. The area, Asia is bubbling with engagement.
It's lit
up on engagement on this, which is really fascinating. And so I was going to sort of hold this on to the end, but I might cover a bit of this now, and we can get back to some facts and information. But a lot happens in the side events. And one particular side event was attended by a close associate of mine. And he said to me, he said, top level people, because this particular gentleman's in a top level bank, he said top level people were in the room. He spent a day talking to some of these big decision makers. He said, but the conversation I found most fascinating was with a Chinese government representative who was there, not officially representing the government, but clearly talking about the government's interest. He said that China has 1,000 Web3 developers employed and blockchain developers employed by the government just developing Web3 blockchain applications.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Our goal is to produce good Web3 applications that will, get this quote, build social harmony.
That is so unlikely coming from China, but it's at the same time astonishing that this is happening at the leadership level. And I think it's not new, because China, when I was at IBM, we were looking into building blockchain networks. And Derek, if you recall, China was the first country that built a national level grid called BSN, which was a blockchain network, like a grid computing network, open for all to build their application on top of it. it never took off because of the on ban and off ban that China went through over the past few years. But that was the initiative that China did. So I'm amazed to see this is still happening, and they actually have done this at their leadership level. So that's fascinating to hear.
They also said that Hong Kong was a testing ground for crypto. And now, we always guessed this, didn't we, Nitin, when we used to say, Hong Kong looks like a petri dish to me. But from an official, he said, we are looking at what's happening in Hong Kong, and we're looking at how Hong Kong is picking up the interest in engaging in crypto. And we see that as an opportunity to test our views on crypto there. So just as we had thought. And one of the takeaways, I asked this particular gentleman who had been speaking with him, I said, did you get the sense that they are simply developing the technology progressively, or that they see there is an opportunity to develop technology here and get ahead of the USA while the USA is fumbling the ball? And he said, absolutely. And that was a really interesting statement. So just in case one wondered, while America is fumbling the ball, what different countries in Asia are doing. And of course, China's just this massive entity of Asia and always referred to as such. But they are actively progressing in this space with the intent of being ahead of the US. And I can't say, unfortunately, the same is happening in the USA. So that reflected in a lot of what we saw there. Yes, each year you see a different theme at the conferences. We see themes such as Web 3.0 was a theme one year, DeFi was a theme one year, gaming was a theme one year, metaverse was a theme one. Well, the theme this year is clearly real world assets. It's all about tokenizing real world assets. And we got Jenny Johnson, by example, who's the president of Franklin Templeton. And they've got about 1.4 trillion funds under management and advisement. Yeah, a lot. And she's very positive about this world. In fact, they're developing a whole variety of tokenized real world assets in the form of T-bonds and stable coins, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, anywhere there is a revenue stream, it can be tokenized. And that's her view. So the way her eyes see everything is that as she looks around the place, everything can be tokenized, kind of like how we saw everything in 2017, but in a slightly different way, I think. And her view was that this is like the very first iPhone. It's the beginning of the entire revolution. And so she's totally excited about it. But from the real world assets viewpoint, Nitin.
Yeah. So two things of this, right? One is Franklin Templeton actually had the same messaging and rhetoric when they were at Consensus. And I think Jenny herself was on the stage and she had this same enthusiasm, same messaging. And they had a massive representation, Derek, when a typical space is quite expensive to get on the middle of the floor. And they were right in the smack dab in the center. And they have a platform called Benji. Benji is a platform that allows them to be able to tokenize. And being an investment manager, and a lot of people don't understand the nuances between the various market participants that represent the capital market and the capital market infrastructure, is that you have banks and you have investment banks and you have investment managers. And the job of investment managers is to take risks. They understand the risk, they quantify the risk, and they take risks. And think of them as a private entity that they have to deal with much more highly regulated entities, because it's the entities like State Street, like Bank of New York Mellon, like JP Morgan Chase, and like Fidelity, who are broker-dealer networks. They have a higher threshold for fiduciary responsibility and prudential treatment of assets, whereas investment managers create products and sell those products, and the back office and middle offices to maintain the thesis and what they have to maintain. So they need some clarity, but they can issue products at some point, as long as those products are governed and taken care of as any fund would do. So real world assets, and I'll draw back from Singapore and draw similar analogies, in permissionless now. The lion's share of conversation permissionless, which was quite surprising. One, it was very sparsely attended. So we have about 25% of expected capacity. So they're expecting about 5,000 people, but pretty much all the halls were empty. We did have a pretty decent expo floor, which is the newer projects, but they were not exactly very crowded. It was very sparsely attended. Data point number one. And the reason that was discussed at the conference, including some of the keynotes and main stage, is that a lot of audience have moved to Singapore, which is where you were, enjoying all the attention that Singapore did and Asia is doing, which is, as you mentioned, a series of events in Bali and Korea Blockchain Week, and then eventually Singapore, followed by eventually this moving to Hong Kong a week later. So I think all of this is indicative of the interest, and the only conversation we had was same of the same. So fact that yes, crypto is great, we need to do more. There was hardly any conversation around building and innovation and what we need to do. It was more towards, yeah, we are fighting the regulation. There was the institutional track, and there was a culture track, which was interesting because that's talking about the culture and the ecosystem, which I didn't choose to attend because I had a different, just like you can only do so many things at a time.
Yeah.
And institutional track was a small room, so it was packed. But I would say that the institutional track was not as well attended as it could have been if this was a bear market, if we had regulatory clarity. And lion's share of conversation was around the same. It's SEC or regulators, lack of regulatory clarity, what happened in Congress. So it is more towards policy conversation, lack of innovation. And I just felt it was kind of boring to me. You go to these events to learn, you go to these events to connect with people and share what's exciting, what's new. And I didn't get to do that. And after so many years, I felt that conference was complete waste of my time. I did get to meet a lot of people, a lot of friends. So it's completely opposite of Token 2049 in Singapore. And maybe, Derek, as you alluded to, it's a sign of the times that talent, ideas, excitement, it's all moving away because people want to hear more stuff. And ideally, if I was not traveling a few weeks before to Europe, I would have been in Singapore, only because I think Singapore, besides the great food and a great town and great city and 400 amazing events with 400 plus personalities that you could meet and share your perspectives, I was stuck in Austin. And so that's sort of a quick reporting from permissionless perspective. And I wish it's better next year. Hopefully we have some clarity and we can move on to actually building and innovating. So I'll pause here, Derek, and over to you in terms of other Singapore experiences that you've had.
I hear your pain because you're extraordinary conference goer, and you know a good conference, and you networked and really very well known too, of course. And I was surprised how many people I spoke to along the way that had heard our podcast and commented on that, which was excellent. And so I would really love another Token 2049 this week, like to continue it, to be able to actually get to the rest of those 400 side events, etc., because they were so interesting. But it is clear that this particular period of time and event was focused on tokenization of real world assets. And so maybe just speaking about that a little bit, with that focus, we had Michael Gogner, who is the managing director of Chain Analysis, turn around and say, that he thinks that real world assets will end up becoming 99% of all transactions on blockchains, which I've got to say I wasn't thrilled about hearing, unless real world assets just become so enormously large. But I think this is in keeping with the current kind of annual euphoria associated with real world assets. Like all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, real world assets, we understand that, we know how to tokenize it. Wow, so real world assets are going to be tokenized in the future, and income streams are going to be tokenized in the future, and this is a revolution. Yeah. Well, of course, to the crypto goers, it's not a revolution at all. It's like a side event.
It's not. That's right.
The revolution's wrapped around democratization of assets and decentralized finance and business being done on the metaverse and in entire worlds of tokenizing digital assets and digital personas, etc. That's what we kind of think the revolution is. But as traditional industry comes to it, they go, wow, so our industry can be tokenized. this is a revolution. Well,
Yeah.
have you seen
So
that?
here's the thing, Derek. I spend a lot of time on this topic because I do work for a very large GCF, which is globally systemically important financial institution. Lion's share of my energy goes into deciphering what it needs to convert real world tokenization. And I don't think we're anywhere close to 99%. In fact, I think the industry has done 0.001% so far, which is the likes of Franklin Templeton, who have taken an easy money market fund and tokenized it in native form, but the back office systems are the same. So let me peel the onion a little bit more for the audience to understand what this is. You have the crypto ecosystem, which is driven by crypto economic, the mining and the minting and the proof of work and staking. This all are the primitives around the crypto assets, which are tokenized assets whose value is determined by the crypto economic principles. And then you have the real world assets. When you say real world assets, these are gold and commodities and equities and stocks and bonds and debt, the income stream as you pointed out, Derek. And the ability for tokenization of this today is only at the surface. So you tokenize something, you issue it, but you don't really achieve the true value of asset tokenization until you actually eliminate or minimize something called the mid-office and back-office functions. So this is the function that does record keeping. This is the function that does valuation. This is the function that makes sure everything is in order before they move the real movement of asset that actually happens, which me and you may not see it because we're interfacing with some dealer broker through a website. So I wrote a paper on this topic, which I published 3 weeks back. It got a lot of hits. And the topic was basically is impediments and hindrance and in adoption of tokenized digital asset in an enterprise. Like, what are the challenges? And incidentally, I cited two fundamental issues that go with challenge. And that's why I questioned the 99% thesis on this. And I today actually had a webinar with NASDAQ, which is published. It was a live event when they actually asked my opinion on this topic. I cite two challenges. One is a harmonized operational framework. And one of the most important design principles that need to be adopted to achieve this is interoperability for on-chain and off-chain assets. And what I mean by that is that for tokenization of real-world assets, an average company today, an average bank, spends 1.2 years. That's an average. Some of them spend 5 years, some of them spend 2 years. An average is 1.2 years. An average cost of any project is 1.5 million, and 99% of the projects have failed. And an average of 7 vendors. So you can imagine the time it takes to onboard vendors and buy technology from them and do these things. And I came to a conclusion that we can focus on reducing the cost of failures by better understanding the business of getting into asset tokenization. Like, why are we doing it? So while Franklin Templeton as the investment manager can achieve and afford to do this, the lion's share of mid-office, back office is done by other entities. And that has not gone away. We are still doing any of that stuff. So some of these things it's great sounding. And for crypto, as you rightly pointed out, if I'm relying on this only because the crypto markets are a bit down, we are still in a bear market. So RWA, or real world assets, takes the center stage to say, can we revolutionize the entire financial system? Who are the startup companies who are doing these things? But I would say, Derek, that if that messaging was the primary messaging, to me, it's a litmus test that we are still in bear market and crypto is still need to evolve and develop till it becomes the center of the stage. And I foresee convergence at some point, that at some point we should stop having this conversation and we say it's an asset. And we view crypto as a fifth asset class. And we view crypto as a fungible instrument that can be exchanged for other instruments. When we get to that stage, I don't think this debate should happen at some point, because at that point, we would have understood the benefits and we will no longer be talking about it. It's like internet. Everybody has to have an e-commerce website because they already understood the value of doing commerce online. I equate that movement to similar movement in asset tokenization. So I'll pause here, but love to get to see if this sentiment was similar on token 2049, or was it only bullish comment and no one really brought up, which is another issue with conferences. Everybody's so bullish that we forget and stop and take a pause to discuss challenges and impediments that we need to address as builders.
So firstly, Nitin, I 100% agree with you. I think that's an extremely good synopsis of the situation. that's why, I mentioned earlier on, each year there's a different sort of area of focus, whether it happens to be DeFi or metaverse, et cetera, et cetera. This year, it is tokenization of real world assets. And I 100% agree with you. It's the focus because it's a bear market. And oddly enough, as we've discussed before, we are so excited about extraordinary new democratization of assets and the ability to see global trade outside the silos of just country bases. And this is an extremely exciting, area of tech that's there. However, it's there because everyone's very bearish around the current market. So therefore, they're going and looking for tradition. And so we are looking towards BlackRock endorsing an ETF with excitement. It's bizarre because 2 years ago, we'd be going, why would BlackRock do an ETF? You don't need one. And so we are at this stage as an industry looking towards traditional industry engagement and involvement with the hope that that's going to pull us out of this bear market into a bull market. I agree 100% that this is just this year's interest and it will continue to grow, no question, just as decentralized finance continues to grow, etc. But convergence is just highly likely, Nitin. Why wouldn't you converge when you've got an extraordinarily efficient way of being able to transact huge amounts of volumes of transactions in an immutable form of blockchain? Whether you transact digital assets or you transact digitized real world assets, it's just the logical place to be. So we're just at another stage of history in this space. And for those that are in the real world assets, they consider this the beginning of the world for them. It's the iPhone. And whereas you and I think the iPhone was in 2016,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Derek, tell us a little bit more, and this is not a crypto or digital asset conversation. It's another passion of yours is cars. And I believe, I don't know if this was planned or this just happened to be coinciding with the F1. And from what I hear in Singapore, having been to Singapore like 100 times, of course, it's a very small country. It's 34 kilometers in length. And I've actually walked that on one of the Sundays. And I think that they convert the streets into F1. So tell us more about the excitement around F1. Was it after 2049? And did you have front row seats or front row room window, or whatever the avenue was for you to experience that? What is that like? And I know cars are your passion. You light up when you talk about cars. Tell us more about that experience, because I'd love to see that.
It is just such an exciting, visceral experience. Even if you walk around the city of Singapore, you can hear in the background mid-afternoon this magnificent sound of what a flat six engine's running. Flat six mean Porsche Carrera Cup. And if I wasn't there watching the Carrera Cup, you could hear them in the distance. They sort of sound like an enormous swarm of extremely angry bees. And as you get up close to them, it's just like the ground shakes and you see these incredible pieces of tech running past. And they are just a prelude to the piece de resistance, which is the F1s appearing. And when the F1 cars start going past for the first lap or so, and they're doing their time trials or their warm-ups or whatever it happens to be, you just get to see these amazing pieces of technology, highly restricted by the amount of horsepower they're allowed to run, because you could be running 2,000 horsepower in these things these days, So restricted by the amount of horsepower they're running, all running the same tire makes, either soft, medium, or hard, but all manufactured by the same time, all regulated so that these cars are competitive and no one gets a massive advantage over someone else. And you're seeing 62 laps around this incredibly pretty city of Singapore in the evening, which is the perfect time to do it because the temperature is right. And these 62 laps of these cars that kind of sound ominous and frightening and amazing at the same time as they fight each other to the end, using both strategy and driving skills. And at the end of 62 laps, the difference between the first car and the last car is like 100 seconds. And often the difference between the first car and the fourth car is like 5 seconds. It's incredibly close. And so you imagine the degree of when they go in and have their pit stops, and there's 5 seconds difference in the top four cars. Pit stops are important. and how fast they're done and how quickly they get out. And this particular race was just stunning because Ferrari led the race the entire time in car number one, managed to do that on soft tires and get in and swap out the soft tires when there was a yellow flag that came out on the course. Lucky that they are always planning yellow flag because that's the opportunity for them to get in to swap out the tires. But towards the end of it, he's running out of tires. He's got soft tires that aren't gripping any longer. And the last 10 laps, by that stage, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, who are these sort of their prime competitors, had gone in earlier on and swapped out their tires to good medium quality tires. And they were about 18 seconds to 20 seconds behind. And there was 10 laps to go and they were gaining 2 seconds a lap. So you do the numbers, 2 seconds a lap. Every lap they were getting 2 seconds closer like this to the lead.
Wow.
And every lap the Ferrari was just getting squirrely all over the course trying to hang on because his tires were going. Everyone knew it was happening. And they actually banter on the radio. You can hear the different groups talking to each other. Everyone hears it. So all the competitors hear what they say too. And at one stage, the Ferrari was up the front and he said, I think I've got an extra 1 second up my sleeve. And George Russell in the McLaren was behind, in the Mercedes was behind him and turned around and said, I would say 2 seconds. In other words, you're holding us all back. You know what I mean? We know you're holding us all back, but you can do it around a course like Singapore. At any rate, these two guys managed to gain all of that. And in the last 2 laps, they were 1.5 seconds behind him. And George Russell lost it on the corner and went straight into the wall, a padded wall, so he was fine, rode off the car in the last lap. And Lewis Hamilton became the third, and Norris from McLaren was second. So it was an incredible race right to the very end. And very exciting. So
I can sense the excitement in your voice.
Show. Yeah, such a good show.
And where do you see this from? Did you see it on TV or were you actually in a hotel room that you could see?
Yeah, no, I was in.
Oh, wow. So you got access to grandstands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. That was great. So was heat not an issue because it was in the evening? Because it's still hot.
Yeah, it's so hot in the afternoon. I watched Robbie Williams in concert afterwards, which was a brilliant show. Typical of what happens when you're at an F1. You get these amazing artists flying from all around the world and perform. And Robbie Williams said, how do you survive here? He says, it's hotter than the sun. And then you go into one of the hotels, etc., and he says, it's colder than the Arctic. And it's so true. Fantastic. That's the way Singapore does everything. It gets very hot in the afternoon.
Well, then we have to invite you to Austin, Derek, because we do have an F1 quota, which is Circuit of the Americas in Austin. Last time I was there, I think Max Verstappen was the lead. He won all the F1s, including the last one, and he was very young, and it was enviable. But I prefer watching on TV. I think I understand better on TV than in person, except that you miss out on all the sounds and all the experience that you talk about.
Yeah. And there's big screens everywhere, so you actually get to see it. Even though you're sitting in a grandstand, you see a section of the track. You watch them on the rest of the track. And what's so exciting is that you hear them coming. So you're sitting there waiting, and then all of a sudden you can just hear them coming around the corner. You're watching them on the screen going, one more lap, one more corner, here they are. And it's whom, whom, whom as they go past, and everything shakes. And the grandstand shouting and screaming for each one of their sort of designated drivers or teams that they love. So very exciting. Brilliant that Token 2049 is at the same time. Very clever, so that people can go and enjoy that. So all in all, a brilliant weekend in Singapore, and ready. Very happy to do it again. And I think at the moment, the future of crypto assets at the moment, it's in Singapore. Sorry, it's in Asia, of which Singapore is a center. Yeah. No, I would agree. And I think I used to go to Singapore quite a bit, and I found the same energy and same enthusiasm, both from the regulators and the various projects that, again, we've been asked to participate, but we cannot. For example, Project Guardian, which is MAS sandboxed environment, allowing financial services to experiment with the various DeFi protocols and using of real world assets. And that's why I think one of the messaging from MAS in Singapore, which is a primary regulator, is acceptability and
openness to experimenting with protocols and figuring out the risks, which is the right way to do it in any way. But before we wrap, Derek, I have one question for you, which is profound, and only you can answer it, I think, because you have equal level of passion, which you could sense from your description of F1 and as you described the digital assets. You talked about regulation and you described the horsepower and the fact that you limit giving a competitive but in an equal playing field for various participants. If you were to compare crypto to F1, barring the transport and rails, how would you compare the two in context of regulation, speed, and the excitement that it generates and the economics of? I know it's a loaded question and we didn't prepare for this, but I still want to put you on the spot and get your real thoughts, around this.
I think the youth are watching F1 and going, isn't this awesome? And I think traditional finance is still driving in 67 Chevys going, aren't these things big and comfortable? And they're looking at the progression across there and they're going, we're not getting into that damn car. It's too fast and too dangerous. I think that's what's happening at the moment.
Well, that's fantastic. That's very well put, Derek. I actually got it. And on that, I think we should wrap. But thank you again for such an entertaining and exciting session and podcast. It was exciting. And now I'm actually envious because I think I need to go to Token 2049. So the next one is in Dubai, which is in April next year, and September again the year after, next year in Singapore. I'll try to make to one of them, maybe both. So we'll see where this goes. But thanks again for sharing your experience with us.
Look, agreed, Nitin. I hope to be able to get to one of them too. We've got to realize that Dubai is another major center in this space. And as America is, I think, feeling threatened by these Formula Ones and still driving their Chevys and enjoying the comfort, I think the rest of the world is looking to how to adopt it. And that's exciting to be in that sort of space. I will sort of round it up with a couple of statements from some of the big investment companies. And that is Chris Rain, the MD of Galaxy, turned around and said, look, the institutions are still kicking the can down the road, waiting for regulations to occur before they can invest in the space, but they're watching it. And Dan Pierio, who is the founder of 10T Holdings, they've got about 1.2 billion invested in this space, said that he's very confident that, quote, the bull run will be well and truly in play by September next year. And so he sees us coming out of this bearish period. So those are the two predictions that I took from the show relating to both the institutions and the likelihood of the bull run coming to an end. So we've run over time, but that was a great event that we had managed to and fascinating comparison between the two. Look forward to seeing you next week, Nitin.
Likewise, Derek. Take care and rest up. I think you just got back today. So we'll chat next week. Ciao.
Indeed. Bye for now.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our weekly conversation. If you have any questions, comments, or suggested topics, please contact Nitin Gower or myself on the emails displayed here or via our LinkedIn profiles. Feel free to subscribe and share with like-minded friends. Stay well, inquisitive, and engaged. See you next week.